Spider-Man 2018 was an incredible game. Yeah, it had its flaws. It wasn't perfect, but I thought it was a refreshing entry into the boring slog that is tedious open world games. So, needless to say, I was genuinely very excited for Spider-Man Part 2. And when I did finish it, I did absolutely love it. But the more I thought about it, the more the game sat with me. I had a lot of complaints. There's still some things in the second game that are done extremely well, but I think as a sequel, it needs a lot more to it and just a lot more improvements. And I think that the first game does a lot of things much better. So, I'll start off this review with probably the most important part and aspect of the first and second game, which is the Now, before I do get into some of my gripes with this combat, I do want to say there are some things that it does really well and that I really enjoyed from the combat. The abilities were super fun to use. I mean, they aren't entirely new to Spider-Man 2. They were in the Spider-Man Miles Morales spin-off game, but I mean, they're still very fun here, and there's a lot of improvements made. Instead of the abilities being placed on the focus bar, they're placed on an entirely separate little ability section, which I like a lot. It makes sure that you can use your abilities, but you can also use the benefits of the focus bar if need be. And it also makes it to where you can store abilities for when they're most useful. It also allows you to do a lot more creative and fun combos with the abilities. Parrying was another really fun addition to this game. Parrying in general, I think, adds a lot to games, but especially in this one. I think it makes the combat a bit more complex and has you doing more with the combat. I think my only gripe with parrying in this game would be that it's not necessary for the normal enemies and not very much encouraged. It is encouraged for the bosses, but for the normal enemies, it isn't really. I also think it doesn't flow into combat super well. I mean, it's fun to use, but I think a lot of times I found myself when I had to parry just completely stopping the movement to parry and then to keep going. I think the gadget system and how you use the gadgets are a bit more improved. In the first game, how you would change gadgets is like a weapon select, but in this game, it's just two buttons and then boom, you shoot out a gadget, which I think is just a lot more smooth. It makes it to where you can just use it freely in whatever you're doing. You don't have to like pause the game just to change a gadget, which I think is just more fun. And I think the gadgets in general are just a lot of fun. They're very cool. There are a lot more moves added on to the skill tree and the move list. This is something that's expected in a sequel for this type of game, but I mean, it's something that I might as well mention. There's a lot more combos that you can do and stuff with these new moves. I mean, I don't know, it's just more fun. I especially like the kicking one. I think that one's pretty funny. Now, time to get to some of my bigger complaints with this combat. I think most of my gripes with the combat can be summarized as a lack of depth compared to the first game. One example of this are the suits. The suits in the first game were really cool, mainly because with each suit it would come with a suit power that fits the suit. It's a good way to set each suit apart and actually make it feel different, and plus it adds a lot of variety to the game. So it mixes up the gameplay a lot too, and just makes the combat a lot more fun. So in the second game, instead of adding suit powers, they added a couple colors you can edit, I guess. They basically remove all the suit powers, which just sucks. I don't even get the idea either, because it's not like they replace it with any kind of gameplay benefit. Like I said, it feels like they just replaced it by adding colors that you can edit to the suits, which is just dumb. There's no point in unlocking in these suits either, because it's not like they even have the basic decency to put a separate currency from the suits to actual stuff that will benefit your gameplay and add stuff to the gameplay. It's the same currency. So, what is the point in getting any of the suits if none of them have any powers? It just doesn't make any sense. You do still have powers, or technically just two. There's one for Peter and one for Miles. The one for Miles is like this big electric explosion, and the one for Peter is this like super symbiote surge like rage thing. And I mean, they're both cool, I guess, but compared to the first game where you get like 20 powers from the suits, it's kind of lame. I mean, you can expand those powers by like stuff in the skill tree, I guess, but I would much rather have like multiple powers than just one with a couple upgrades. The suits are just a huge downgrade. There's like, they may look cooler, I guess. That's probably the only thing I could say about them, but there's no point in them looking cooler if they offer nothing gameplay wise. The thing that made them so cool in the first game is that you could mix and match all the abilities, and you could do like so much more with them. In this game, you could change the color of your suit, which is useless. Just dumb. Another complaint that I have about the combat is the suit tech. The suit tech isn't bad on its own, but it just feels like a worse version of the suit mods in the first game. The suit mods from the first game kind of acted like these more powerful upgrades than the other upgrades. So you could get like really cool stuff, like when you do enough air combos you could electrocute enemies, or if you perfect dodge you can slow down time. Stuff like that that's really cool. And you still get like kind of cool stuff in the second game, but it's a lot less powerful and effective. It's just the suit tech stuff is just a lot more basic. You would get stuff like, oh, increase damage in the air, or slightly heal on a web shoot, or slightly heal on a parry, and stuff like that. And I mean, that stuff is still fine, it's there, but again, it's not as cool, and you can't really achieve that godlike status that you could with the suit mods in the first game. That's what made them fun in the first place, is that you could upgrade yourself like to such a huge amount in what you specifically wanted to do. Another thing to mention about the suit tech is that instead of normally getting like an upgrade to strength or health when you level up, you have to like manually input it instead, which is fine. That's a fine like change. I think the one cool thing about it is that instead of just automatically getting these like upgrades at like whatever level you're at, you can choose to just go full strength or full health, which is kind of cool. It adds like a bit more to it, but at the same time, I would still say the suit tech is worse than the suit mods. Another problem I have is with the gadgets. Now, like I said, there are some cool changes with the gadgets. I like that you can just shortcut them and shoot them out with two buttons instead of a select wheel. But at the same time, there's much less gadgets. I'm pretty sure it was just split in half, which is kind of dumb. I also think that there's less upgrades to the gadgets. I could be wrong about that, but I just felt like there's more you could do overall with it. I guess this could tie into like the suit tech problems I have in the suit mods, but there are also like more mods and more upgrades that you could get that will allow you to get more gadgets and experiment or a lot more with those gadgets. I think one thing that they could have done that would have made up for some of their lack of depth in a lot of parts of this combat is add more abilities. I like the abilities. I think they're a lot of fun, but To remove all this stuff, I think the least that they could do is just add more abilities. For the most part, it's just like two sections of abilities. For Miles, it's like his blue electric stuff and yellow electric stuff, and for Peter, it's like his spider legs and his symbiote legs, which is cool, and you can switch them around when you want. But I think it would be better if they had even more abilities added on to it. It would add at least like a little bit of variety back into the game. Another complaint I have is I just don't think that there's much of a difference between Peter and Miles. This isn't like a huge complaint, and I do think there's some difference there, like with the abilities and stuff. Although I do think some of the abilities are kind of the same, or at least like a bit similar. But I feel like they could add a bit more to make the gameplay of the characters feel different. Like maybe have some dedicated moves for Peter that Miles can't do, and vice versa. Boss fights. Now, I didn't know where else to put this, but I might as well just start talking about it here. There's a lot I like and dislike about the boss fights. I think that this game improves a lot. Like, I think the boss fights are more challenging. They have their own movesets and stuff, and they're, in some cases, they're more engaging. But I think in the first game, the bosses feel a lot more different. It definitely feels like in this game, each boss kind of plays out the same. They have different movesets and stuff, but they're all kind of just in this enclosed area, and you fight them, parry them, beat them up a bunch of times, and then boom, they're dead. But in the first game, each boss had its own like mechanics and things going on, and some of them did feel a bit tacky and gimmicky, but that also led to them feeling a lot different from each other. Again, I do want to emphasize, I still really enjoy the combat. It never got tired. It was always fun to beat up the enemies, beat up the bosses, and pull off a bunch of really fun combos. And it was always really, really satisfying. But it's really held back from reaching its true potential. The first game I just felt like had a lot more variety and a lot more to experiment around with its combat. You could mix up a bunch of supers, you could add in a bunch of like suit mods to fit your playstyle, whereas in the second game it kind of plays out the same. You parry, you hit the enemies, maybe do a bunch of combos, and then maybe add in some abilities for crowd control, and then some gadgets once those abilities run out. And again, it's still fun. Like, it's not a bad thing. It's a cycle, but it's not a bad cycle. But there's just a lot less variety, experimentation, which leads to its lack of depth. Spider-Man 2 has some of the worst, if not the worst stealth I've seen in any game. The stealth in the first game was pretty fun. It wasn't the most engaging or enthralling stealth ever, and it had a lot of glaring flaws, but at least you could do this. In Spider-Man 2, they pretty much removed any gadgets that made stealth actually fun. Maybe that qualifies as more of a gadget complaint, but I mean, it makes stealth so much more simple and boring. They did add a web line instead, but I feel like the web line just makes the stealth even more brain rotty. The stealth AI is absolutely awful. Even if you're standing right in front of the enemies, it will take them several seconds to even recognize that you're there. When you take out more enemies, they don't even bother to call for backup or try to do anything in that situation. I don't think they even notice it. Maybe all the enemies were lobotomized or something. Maybe that'll explain why they turn on stupid mode whenever it's stealth time. It just makes no sense. It really feels like this game puts barely any thought towards stealth. The first game didn't have a huge emphasis on stealth or anything, but they gave you enough to where doing stealth was still a fun option. In this game, it just takes away the fun. It just really sucks because I feel like there's a lot of improvements they could have made. They could have added more gadgets for stealth, maybe more stealth mechanics, remove that stupid safe and danger marker, so to make stealth more challenging, have the enemies actually try and hunt you, maybe have enemy types for specifically for stealth. Like there's so much more they could do with stealth, but they just chose not to and went backwards in almost every way. I think the only genuine compliment I could give the stealth for this game is that you can skip it entirely instead of just being forced into sections, which isn't like the best compliment to give or like a big compliment at all. But I mean, it's nice that they're not forcing you to do their half-baked, unoriginal, boring stealth. So that's nice. Now, with that out of the way, I think the MJ missions are actually pretty fun. I didn't know where else to add this, but I mean, I might as well just add it to stealth just to have something positive to say about stealth, even though this like barely counts. But like I said, the MJ missions are actually very fun. They're improvement in pretty much every way compared to the first game. They added more things to the stealth, so there's more ways to get past enemies or take them out if you want. And instead of having a game over screen whenever you get spotted, instead you have to actually face the consequences of that and either run away or try and get to them first. And all of this just makes her gameplay a lot more engaging. In the first game, it was probably my biggest complaint just because it felt like complete filler. There was barely anything to it, and it just wasn't very fun in general. But like I said, they just put more stuff here so that it's a lot more fun. And it also feels like her missions tie in more to what Spider-Man is actually doing, which also just makes it more fun and engaging. I wasn't really expecting this. I thought they would either remove the MJ missions from the first game or just have them there as filler, but they actually did more with it to make it a fun and actually good part of the game, which was pleasantly surprising.
Oh no! It is the dive rocket launcher! Take action regarding that individual!
Relax, I'll handle it.
I am the angry pumpkin. The architect and the builder. They arrive calmly from their escalator with a sense of purpose. They are playing at their residence. The head is soaring.
The story for the first game felt a lot different from most superhero things. It followed the formula, like the usual formula for superhero stories, but had a lot more emotion to it and wasn't afraid to have some very sad moments and bad things happening to characters, which at the time when I played the first game, I was pretty surprised by. And Spider-Man 2, towards the beginning, did have a lot of very good build-up, and there were a lot of parts of the story that were done very well, but I feel like towards the end, a lot of the flaws in the writing and in the story start to show. The dialogue is like one big example of this. I'm not saying all the dialogue is bad, but I think towards the end there's a lot of like really stupid lines, especially with that Scream MJ boss fight where they're talking about paying off their mortgage while they're fighting each other, and that was pretty dumb. There's a lot of story moments, especially towards the end, that feel a bit forced. What I mean by this is like when Peter takes off the symbiote suit, everyone kind of just starts forgiving him for being all evil and emo and stuff. When it just doesn't, none of it really feels natural. It feels like they didn't have enough time in the game, or they just didn't want to commit too much time to that development. I don't know, but it doesn't feel natural. Despite that, there's still a lot I liked about the story. Most of what I liked, though, takes place towards the first half of the game. I know I'm going out of order, but I don't really care. I really liked how this game introduced its new characters. Like Harry, for example, I do like how it felt like a sort of a reunion between Peter and Harry. I also like how they introduced Craven a lot. I like how towards the beginning of the game he kills off a lot of the villains from the previous game. I mean, not gonna lie, that was pretty cool. I think the way that they introduced the Venom symbiote was really cool. I do like how you don't find out about it until a bit later in the game. It's not there right away, and I do like that about the story in this game, that they save a lot of these bigger moments, like when they introduce the lizard. That's another one where they save it towards later in the game for more like crucial moments, and it ends up kind of just feeling better. I like what they did with Peter and Miles. I think watching Peter slowly slowly lose control to the symbiote suit, and Miles, who feels a lot more alone and who tries to rely on Peter, which and can't because of Peter in the Venom suit, was a pretty interesting dynamic. Now back to some of my complaints. I think how they implemented gameplay in certain like super emotional moments was a bit worse. Not by much. I still think there's a lot of more emotionally charged moments or bigger story moments where the gameplay that's there really enhances it, like when Peter gets the symbiote suit or the Venom part, which I'll talk about a bit later. But I do think it's a bit worse, and you can definitely feel that by its ending. I think the ending in this game is much worse than in the first one.
Backshots or a good career?
I will pass on the backshots. I want to focus on myself. I strive for a well-organized schedule that balances work and personal life, allowing me to focus on my career goals while maintaining a healthy lifestyle. By prioritizing tasks, setting realistic deadlines, and continuously learning and improving my skills, I aim.
The level design and set pieces definitely shine the brightest here compared to the other aspects of the game. I think in this particular section they did a fantastic job. The levels are always super fun to go through, and they have their own their own unique ways to like deal with enemies and stuff. And they're just super well designed. They have nice areas that you can beat up enemies in, and they're always just so much fun to go through. All the big set pieces for this game are genuinely very impressive, and feels like it uses the hardware to its max. The Venom section of the game, I think, is a great example of what makes this aspect of the game so much better. I think the Venom section is the best, probably the best part of the game in general. This was the best way to introduce Venom, and it does such a great job at conveying how Harry feels during the situation and showing how powerful Venom is, even to the point where he knocks out Spider-Man and just fully takes control. And the gameplay for this section does a very good job at demonstrating this, giving you the ability to like pick up enemies and throw them, making you like so much larger so that you just demolish enemies. And the level 4 Venom is just so fitting. Like the platforms are a lot wider and bigger for like Venom to jump around in. The finishers actually kill the enemies now, which is a nice touch. And it does have like a challenging boss fight towards the end. Venom's abilities compared to like the other abilities for the other characters are like so much more destructive. I kind of wish there were 4 instead of just like 2 abilities, but I mean they're still like super fun to use. There's also just like a huge amount of attention to detail in this game. Like a couple examples, for instance, are like when you get damaged a lot or when your health is low, like the suit will have like a bunch of tears in it, or the suit will look like roughed up itself. And there's certain parts of the game that will kind of affect, like certain parts of the main story will affect what happens in like the overall like world and just game in general. Like that after the Sandman section where there's a whole part of the city that's just covered in sand, or like that one section where you're fighting with the Harry symbiote and you can fight with him on crimes and stuff, even though that section is just like 5 minutes. There's just so much like cool details and stuff like, littered throughout the world and the main levels. The level design and set pieces was where I feel like most of the work and focus of this game went towards, and it shows because it is very, very impressive. But at the same time, it makes the other aspects of this game, or at least some of them that didn't receive as much attention, feel very lackluster, when I think this game should focus on making every aspect of the game as best as it can be, instead of just parts of the game like this. I have some mixed feelings on the open world for this game. I think the side missions are overall very fun, except for the Brooklyn Visions Club thing. Those missions were pretty garbage, trash. I do think they're overall extremely fun, and I would say in some aspects they're an improvement over the first game. I like that you can find most of or pretty much all of the side missions just by exploring normally. A lot of games have been doing that in the past couple of years, and I think it's an overall good thing. I think it keeps your attention on the game instead of just markers on a mini-map. And Spider-Man 2, I think, does that pretty well. It can tend to feel formulaic sometimes, but I think they do a good enough job at just making the side missions fun and just incorporating them into the open world where it doesn't feel like that. I also felt like I just found these side missions by exploring a lot more than I did in the first game. In the first game there were some things like backpacks or some other side missions where I would find them, but the second game has certain techniques it implements to make side missions pop out in the open world a lot more. So like in the first game, you would see the way you would see these side missions is by using the radar scanner, and there would be like these beams when you would use the scanner to indicate, oh, this is a certain type of mission over here. But Spider-Man 2, they have actual like taller structures or things that look different from most of the open world. For example, the Sandman side missions will have these big gusts of sand that you can see in the open world, or for the symbiote Venom side missions, they'll have these big sprawling symbiote branches that go above most buildings. So they're much easier to spot. On the other hand, I think the rewards that you get from the side missions in this game are worse than the rewards that you get in the first game. Maybe that is more of a complaint towards the upgrade system, because I feel like there was more upgrades you could get in the first game, but I definitely felt less motivated to do all of these side missions than in the first game. I also prefer how they set up the currency itself in the first game, where each side mission had its own currency. It did a good job of separating, making the side missions feel a bit different, and also encouraging you to do more and different side missions to get certain suits or certain suit mods and this and that. Whereas in this game, all of the side missions kind of just have the same currencies, so it doesn't really encourage you to go for one side mission or the other. You could just do any of them, which in my opinion I think is a little worse. The web swinging, I would say, is just an improvement overall. The first game had very good web swinging and made getting to each objective actually fun, which a lot of open world games to this day still struggle with. And in this game, the web swinging, like I said, is just improved in pretty much every way. There's new moves added to the web swinging to make it more fun. There's abilities for the web swinging, which makes it much faster. A lot of the animations for it are it's a lot more satisfying to swing around too. And the web wings are also a great addition. They make it to where you can do more with the web swinging and make it just overall faster. I think the web swinging is just overall faster. The fast travel system in this game is really cool. It's not really something that I use very often. I don't think it's something that people use very often because of how fun the web swinging is. But I think the way you unlock it is cool. Like instead of doing just like a watchtower puzzle or whatever, like in the first game you'd have to actually do enough side missions to unlock fast travel, which is pretty neat. And I like how you can how fast travel is super instant. Like you hold down fast travel in a certain area and it'll just zoom in and boom, your character is there. No loading screen, no anything. It's just boom, you're there immediately. I think that is just super impressive.
Hey, drop it, sir. Drop it.
My New Game Plus playthrough, or just my second playthrough, is where I started to notice a lot of the and pick up on a lot of the complaints that I have shown in this video. It's definitely where I started to realize a lot of the game's flaws and imperfections. I mean, New Game Plus on its own was fine, but I mostly just bad things to say about it, to be honest. I hate the fact that it took 5 months for New Game Plus to be added to this game when it should have been there on launch. And I also think they did not add enough to justify the 5-month wait at all. What they did add to this game was just a bunch of skins, basically. Mostly just symbiote Venom suit skins. Which, I mean, I don't know. I don't really care for the suits to begin with, and I would have rather them add actual stuff that changes the gameplay a bit, maybe, but they didn't really do that. So, I mean, that kind of sucks. Also, I just remembered they added these golden gadget styles where they just put a golden like shoot effect whenever you shoot at a gadget. It's such a nothing thing. When you shoot out gadgets, it looks slightly different if you're really paying attention to the character's hands. I mean, that's about it. Like it's pretty dumb. Definitely my biggest complaint with New Game Plus is the fact that there's no plus difficulty, making pretty much all of the enemies just kind of obsolete. Like they're just there and you punch them a couple times and they're down. The bosses, though, I will say I don't think scale with your upgrades. At least it never felt like it, because the bosses were actually kind of challenging on New Game Plus, so that was at least nice. But the actual enemies themselves were super easy. This is something else I also forgot. They did add a new feature where in the suit tech menu, instead of having those sections like those benefit things where you have to choose between two, you can choose both of them, which in theory would be a good idea if there was actual plus difficulty, because no one's going to go out of their way to do side missions to get both of these abilities just to make the enemies easier than they already are, because there is no New Game Plus difficulty. The only genuine compliment I could give New Game Plus is that it does work. Like, you can carry your upgrades from the original game to this New Game Plus, so I mean, that works. Also, this is yet again like another small thing, but I do like that you can change your symbiote tendril color. You couldn't do that in the original game. Even after you beat it, you can't really change it from black or white, but you can in New Game Plus, which is nice, I guess. But like I said, it works. There's nothing like functionally wrong with it. So, in conclusion, this game is just genuinely, though, I really like this game. I definitely don't like it as much as I did on my first playthrough. I think that might have been a combination of just me slowly thinking about it and being like, oh, hey, I don't like this about the game, I don't like this about the game. I think a lot of my complaints for this game stem from the fact that I just think it's an inferior sequel. I think that there's a lot of improvements that could have been made that just weren't there. There's a lot that they removed from the first game entirely instead of expanding on it, like for example the suit powers. And it just, I think this game just needs more to it. Like, the changes that are here are fine, they're good, but it needs more to solidify itself as a great sequel instead of just a fine or just an alright sequel. Despite that, I still really enjoyed this game. I think that it did such a good job at keeping itself fun. It never really got bored. There weren't any like overly tedious sections, although I still think the beginning of the game could have been a little better. But I still think it did a great job at keeping itself constantly just fun and having amazing moments throughout the game. If I had to put this into the slop meter, this would get about a 8 out of 10. For reference, the first game would get like a 9 out of 10, and Pounch, the best game ever made, would be a 10 out of 10. That's probably like the the highest tier you could reach for quality content. So, yep, video's over.